This is BrainSTEM with your host, neuroscientist Dr. Hilary Marusak, production by Amanpreet and Manmeet Bhogal. I am so excited for today's episode. This episode is all about mommy brain, and I took the opportunity to introduce and invite my best friend from a very long time ago. I'm not going to give numbers because it's been a very long time, but Kristen will be joining us as a mom, and she'll talk all about that. But Kristen, can you first tell us by introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Kristen. I am a mom of 3 right now. I have a 4.5-year-old boy, 2.5-year-old twin girls, and then I have another one on the way, a boy, coming in October. My husband and I have been married for 8 years. Hilary and I, we've known each other a long time. We bonded over our love of soccer and horses, and still bond over that. And I'm excited.
And Kristen is a longtime supporter of the podcast, so we very much appreciate that. So tell us a little bit more about yourself. We'd like to hear more about yourself and your newborn or your baby that's on the way that's going to be born potentially on my birthday.
Yes, maybe on your birthday. Hilary and I have talked about kind of mommy brain for a couple of years now, just my experience with it and how I was fascinated with it because I know it involves the brain a lot. And, I've always been very interested in it. So I'm excited to talk about that and more of my experience, and maybe, other moms can listen to it and feel seen, feel heard that, okay, I'm not, it's a real thing. It happens. And I'm excited to talk about it and give kind of a real perspective on it. And then excited also to hear the professional and expert side of it too, to hear more about that.
Yeah, to hear more about the neuroscience behind it. So this will be an awesome episode.
Yeah.
So mommy brain is something that I think a lot of people hear about. It's kind of like a rite of passage of being pregnant or having children. And a lot of people say they describe it as like a brain fog, or they might lose things that they forget where they place things and things like that. So tell us what it's like in your experience.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is forgetfulness. That's probably the best summary of it. But, every mom's experience is a little different. This one just happens to be mine. I remember it all kind of started during the pregnancy, I would say, with my son, and then it just kind of got more and more escalated from there. But I remember my husband even saying he was worried there was something wrong with me. He really did. I don't know if I've ever told you that. He was worried something was wrong. And, it took a while for us to kind of figure out it's not something wrong with me. It's just, my brain. That's just what happens when, you're pregnant and you have a newborn, and then twins come, and then COVID, all those things affected,
Sure.
And then another one on the way, more pregnancy, even breastfeeding, that really affects it too. And it's a lot. And the forgetfulness that I said, this podcast, your brain almost feels like scatterbrained. It's really hard to focus. You start one thing and then you can't remember what you said a minute later. It's a very weird kind of thing. And I don't know, one of the examples I thought of was when I told you I was pregnant. I texted you. I told you that.
I remember
this. And then literally, 2 weeks later, I text you again and send you an ultrasound. And I was so confused why she wasn't as excited and happy, but I'd completely forgotten that I told you already. That happens very frequently where I can't remember it. And it's just complete blockage, I would say.
That's a great example. And just to be clear, Kristen was not like this before, so this is not her baseline. So forgetting things, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. It's very weird. And it's, you try to focus, and I don't know, your brain it's so focused on your kids. I don't want to say it's 100% focused on my kids, but probably close to it. So all the stuff that you're forgetting, all that extra stuff, it's being filled up by your kids now, taking care of your kids. And I mean, that's what's supposed to do.
More important things.
Right.
And I think that makes sense that your brain would sort of be refocusing, being, having, I'm responsible for these young people. I need to focus all of my brain energy on doing that. I don't care where I left my keys.
Exactly.
So that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you've thought about, or you've observed, or even Nick, your husband, has observed?
Again, like I said, mostly the forgetfulness, but I know other people have experienced this too, but it happens probably more frequently now. You walk into a room and mind goes blank. Why am I in here? What did I need? Or, even listening to your podcast or when my husband's talking to me, sometimes I just draw a blank, like what, I'll have to rewind the podcast. Wait, what was she just talking about? Even though I was listening, I can't recall that information. Or when my husband's talking, I said, I'll be like, what did you just say? He'll say something like, oh, you just said this. Or like, I don't remember. I'm sorry. Like, it was just a minute ago. It's like, I can't.
I'm not ignoring you.
Yeah, I'm not ignoring you, but I know it's hard. He's been more, as it's gone on, he's kind of been more understanding now instead of just like, what's wrong with you? Or why aren't you listening? It's been kind of a progression, and we've evolved, and our relationship, we've figured out how to kind of manage it, and
right. And I'm so glad you're talking about it because, like you said in the beginning, I think a lot of people have experienced this, and I think there's research to show that most people have. But the more we talk about it, the more we can kind of like reduce the stigma. And no, there's not something wrong with you. You're raising a child, so I think that's a really important point. I want to talk a little bit about other changes that have happened. So, when we have the expert on, she will go into kind of like rebranding mommy brain because I think it gets a bad rap. But, you are raising children, which does require like a lot of different changes in your brain, which we call neuroplasticity in neuroscience. So you're having a lot of brain changes that are sort of supporting new roles as being a parent, or just how to care for young children, or how to manage all of their needs with your own. So your brain is adapting, and it's kind of evolving and modifying to take on those new responsibilities, which I think people don't think about that as like a positive change. So what have you noticed on there? Like, are there ways that you think your brain has changed for the better, or for those areas?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because my husband and I always talk about like there's no instruction manual for kids. We came home from the hospital, it's like, here you go, good luck, we'll figure it out. And you really don't. You kind of sit there like, oh, what do you do? And as far as that goes, I think part of it, everyone always talks about like, maternal instincts or even paternal instincts too. It's just, I think that kind of ties in with that you kind of gain those maternal instincts and your intuition, and that, you can kind of focus on that, and you really just get this sense of kind of how to take care of your kids. You're never perfect, and you still kind of always question what you're doing, but I don't know. It is fascinating how you kind of learn that instead of focusing on yourself, or, you have to shift your priorities, and your mommy brain kind of does that for you a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And then you also have to learn how to change your emotions and how to like read your kids' emotions very well. Because I've noticed that moms, I'm not a mom myself, but I've noticed that moms are very good at saying like, oh, I know that cry, or like, I know what that expression means. So that's a whole nother learning process.
Even to say, I'd never even thought of that. That is true. Yeah, moms always know what your kid's saying, or, the cries. Oh, I know that cry. That's a hunger cry, or that's a someone's hurt cry. That is interesting and speaking of crying, I know I've talked to you about this before, the phenomenon and stuff, the phantom cries.
Oh,
I've talked to you about that.
Yeah, tell listeners about that.
Psychological effect. Again, I thought I was kind of crazy, like hearing this, in the more in the newborn phase, not so much now. I think after like 2 years or so, it kind of goes away, and just that newborn stage is really hard. But in the shower, for every child, you hear crying in your head, and
that's crazy.
They're not crying, but you're literally hearing in your head so many times. I turn the shower off. Oh no, there's no crying. Okay, turn back on. 5 minutes later, I swear I hear crying. Turn it off. No cry. And even at night, sometimes you hear crying, and I don't know if it's because they're just crying all the time, so it's like, almost like a memory in your head, or if it's just mommy instinct, something's wrong. Let me just double check and make sure. And it is a very weird that I can't explain, and I don't know why, but it happens.
And it goes
We're not
into
making it up.
Right. And it goes into that your brain is reprioritizing to keep that human being alive. So you kind of want to think about all the things that they would need and what, prioritize their survival. So it's really cool also what like women's bodies and brains do during the whole process. And speaking of, I think that everyone is aware that like the hormone changes that happen during pregnancy are just like a roller coaster. There's like a 10 to 15 fold increase in progesterone, which directly affects your brain as well. So a lot of people, they don't realize like what is happening under the hood in your body is also like affecting your brain. And that could be your emotions, your hunger, your sleep patterns, basically everything. So you are pregnant right now. What have you experienced?
there's so many different phases. Like you said, pregnancy affects it, even breastfeeding affects it, just being a mom in general affects it. So when you got all those things going on, it's a lot. And, I talked about the phantom cries. That was kind of a weird thing. The other thing in the newborn phase, I breastfed. Again, not everyone does, and that's fine. But what I experienced, like when I would hear my baby crying, my boobs would leak milk. That's a weird thing. It's like you can't control, but that's clearly something my brain is telling. No, it's
involuntary
time. Involuntary.
Yeah.
That, and I was like, that's weird, but it happens. And
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just stuff like that. Just kind of these weird things that happen to your body that you just can't control. And even this one, not so much like physical, but more like emotional and social. And I don't really talk too much about it with people, but other moms I've talked to about it, and they've kind of experienced, like in the newborn phase, feeling, you're around a baby almost 24/7.
Right.
And you sometimes feel like isolated a little bit and you're not really around other adults. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. So I think that adds to it too, that I'm literally around them 24/7.
Around little people
I
all
don't
the time.
get like a break during the day. And so I'm just surrounded by kids all the time. And so when I'm around other adults, sometimes it's hard to not talk about my kids, even though I'm supposed to be doing that today. So that's a good thing. But, even around other people, it's like I talk about my kids, or, I was talking to another mom, we get like word vomit almost, because we're just like, oh, we're talking to another adult. So excited. We're not talking to kids right now. And so stuff like that happens. And even that, it's like you can't really control it. It's just something that kind of happens. And that stuff's so really interesting that happens that you can't explain. Well, I can't explain it.
Yeah. No,
expert can explain it.
That's a really interesting aspect as well. And I wanted to touch a little bit more on have you noticed any changes like in your sleeping or your hunger levels? I know that's always a common thing.
The hunger, the hunger is, that stays even, like I said, pregnancy, breastfeeding, it stays for a while, the hunger. And then the sleeping, I've read different things about it, so towards the end of the pregnancy especially, you get really uncomfortable and kind of bigger belly, can't sleep as well. And also just in your head, you're just kind of more in your head a little bit and just have trouble sleeping at night. And they say that that's to kind of prepare you for the newborn, because you're going to be up with the newborn at all hours of the night.
Oh, yeah.
But that's what people say. I don't know if it's been studied, but that's I've had that experience too, that they've, the later on the pregnancy goes, I'm up more. Even now, like I'll sometimes get up at 2 a.m., be up for an hour just in my head a little bit and uncomfortable. And then during the newborn stage, you are up and you're sleep deprived. And that, I think, affects, too, your hormones, your emotions, all those things. And the hormones from pregnancy, delivery, on top of that, it makes a very moody mix of, and it's a lot. It's hard, though, especially, like I said, the first newborn phase, and that could be affecting, like I said, the phantom cries, all those things you're hearing. It's all together, all mixed in. Yes, I think it's all connected. It all affects it. The other thing I put too that has to do with the emotional and other stuff that happens during pregnancy. I've been experiencing this now, nesting, which is a thing. I don't know if you've heard of this. So
a little bit, but explain more.
Yeah, they call it nesting when a mom like kind of almost hyper focuses on getting the house ready for the baby.
I see. Yeah.
Making sure it's clean, the nurseries, we have all the diapers, the clothes, and I've been experiencing that. And again, it's something you can't help. I remember my husband be like, why are you like, we have 3 months. Do you have to clean that right now? Or do we really need to put the baby crib together right now?
Yeah.
And it's like in your head, yes, you do. You have to get it done now is to get ready for the baby.
Yeah.
That's what your mind is focused on.
It's so fascinating because a lot of it seems like so like evolutionarily hard grained into you. And then like a lot of people I'm sure experience very similar things, but there's so much variability. So I'm sure when you talk to other moms, they have different experiences.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
is there anything that you felt like other people have experienced that you maybe haven't?
One thing that I'm sure is affected to this and slightly different, but postpartum depression. I didn't experience that, but I can imagine that having that even in addition to all the other things going on makes it even more difficult to, have a newborn and try to kind of be yourself and navigate motherhood and the mommy brain. And so that's one thing I have not experienced, but I know I've
very
heard
common.
people that it's hard. It can affect that.
Oh, I'm sure. And like along those same lines, like miscarriages or difficulty with getting pregnant, there's a lot to that. And I really like how you talked about like the hormones too, because I think in the field of psychiatry, which is where we work, like it's kind of a new area to know that your hormone levels can directly affect your brain and your mood and your risk for things like depression or PTSD or other types of disorders. So even like during your menstrual cycle, those fluctuations can make you more or less susceptible to mood changes or to PTSD, depending on like when you're exposed to a traumatic event. So I just think same thing goes for pregnancy. Like anything that happens to you during those hormone waves is so fascinating. And I think we don't know that much about it yet. So it's kind of a new area.
Start studying our brains.
I know Kristen always tells me, we'll have to get you in the scanner at some point.
During pregnancy, the delivery, study the brain. Yeah, I'm sure there's so much going on.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. And people have done a little bit of that type of work. And we do have some brain specimens in the lab now that Kristen is going to be holding. Maybe we'll get some pictures to post on our social media. But yeah, we're going to hear a little bit about like the brain changes soon. But that's certainly an open area where we need a lot more research. One of the other things I wanted to mention and talk to you about is daddy brain. So not to pick on Nick. I love Nick very much, your husband. But have you experienced anything in him, or has he said anything's different in his view?
Yeah. So, and again, this is just our experience. And so other people may have a different experience with daddy brain. But my experience is that it almost is like the opposite of mommy brain. I feel like that it's kind of like I think that's the right word, like the counterpoint or the counter to mommy brain. Like where my brain leaves off, he kind of picks up, I think.
A good team.
Yeah. So and I think that's how it should be. It's taken a while, like I said, at the beginning, you're just kind of figuring it out in survival mode. But, we've worked it out where it's kind of, I don't know. Like you said, we're on the same team. We've worked as a team, and when I'm forgetful, he'll remember it, or he'll, now that he understands it, instead of just kind of looking at me like. but yeah. So that's my opinion of it. Again, I don't know the science behind it. There may be it may be different, but that's kind of my opinion of it. Is that it is, but it's to almost benefit and to help. I think.
In a different way.
In a different way. Yeah. It's his brain is remembering more different things, I should say.
Yeah.
Like I'm I don't know if you want to get this, but like I'm kind of the default parent at the home, and that's just how our household is. And so my job is the kids. That is my job. He has different jobs and responsibilities, and so they fall on him, and that's where he kind of picks up where mine. I guess, leaves
you guys are a good team, and I'm sure like you alluded to, every relationship is different.
It's a little different. It's just how ours is, and it works.
So his brain also, I'm sure, if we were to scan it, like there would be changes because he's working out new roles with you. He's working out new roles as being a parent himself. So I'm sure there's changes associated with that too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's very cool.
Well, even he claimed he would never change a diaper. He's changed some diapers.
That's good.
Not very many, but he's changed some.
He's changed some. That's all that matters.
But just like that,
Good job, Nick.
His brain says, I got to take care of my kids, so he does it.
Right. Crazy what people do with their parents, I think.
Yep.
That's awesome. And I'm sure like people have done studies on this, and I'm sure I'm going to ask Dr. Callaghan about this, but they actually they measure the brain activity of a mom and a baby together and just see like the synchrony that happens there. And I don't know, do you ever feel like there's like you guys are connecting you with your kids on a brain wavelength, if that makes sense?
Kind of. Yeah, I know what you mean. And I don't know if it's necessarily the same brain wavelength, but I do feel connected. Or like even still when I hold them, they're still, they're 2.5 and 4.5. Like if I hold them, it's getting harder with my belly. But, you get this oxytocin. I think that's the word. You almost get like this, this, kind of rush of like, okay, I'm okay now, as long as they're not crying. And it's another story. But if they're happy and it's like, you guys can take deep breaths together, you kind of feel, I don't know, it relaxes both of you. And they're you're kind of their home, and they can bring you that kind of comfort too. So in that sense, when we hold them, brings us comfort.
Yeah, and look at you using oxytocin.
I know, I remember, I'm going to remember this word. You told it to me.
Yeah. And if for those who don't know, it's a hormone, and it's traditionally called the love hormone.
Yeah.
So it's for bonding. So obviously mother and baby, and also friends, like touch. And it also plays a really important role in regulating mood and emotion. So it's a really fascinating. We'll have to do a whole episode about like bonding between mother and baby.
Or even, like I said, the breastfeeding again, that's my experience. You almost get like this high. I was telling my husband about it. It's felt like a drug. I remember, especially with my twins, I felt it like when initially, they start, it's like, like your brain literally, I could almost feel the high going to my brain. It was a very fascinating, weird feeling, like, oh, okay, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, and I don't know if that's to like make sure I keep feeding my child, like an evolutionary thing, like make sure you like it so you do it more. I don't know, but I remember that feeling like, oh, okay, this is weird. I can actually feel the oxytocin coming to my brain.
It makes total sense. They bind directly to brain areas that are rewarding and make you feel good. So that does make total sense. And I think you're right. It's probably some sort of evolutionary adaptation to make sure you're taking care of your kids.
Making sure they're fed.
No, this has been super helpful. I do want to end with, you mentioned a couple times that you talk to moms a lot, which I'm sure a lot of people do. And we talk a lot about how community is so important on this podcast. So what do you recommend for somebody who's, there's a lot of aspects to it, who wants more information about mommy brain, about like how to deal with like burnout of being a parent? What would you suggest as a mom?
I know everyone's like, oh, there's groups and stuff, and I'm in some Facebook groups, but I'm more of like an observer in those groups. I tend to just kind of like...
A lurker.
Yeah, I'm a lurker. Like, okay, I'll just look at the information, and, I don't really like contribute, I should say. But yes, other moms especially, and I don't see a lot of these moms a lot, even you. It's like I don't get to see a lot of people in person, but even just texting or phone call, it's like, and sharing those experiences, like, oh, hey, this happened. Oh, that happened to me too. Oh, no way. And talking to pregnant moms or like first-time moms, but not scaring them, but just giving them, hey, this could happen. It's normal. It's okay. I try to share that with people. And even you, I know I've shared a lot with you, and I don't know, good or bad.
I have one quick story about that because I think this is so funny. I have dogs, and Kristen was like, oh, my kid got into the trash can. And I was like, oh, my dog does that every day. So commiserating, I think, is always.
Yes.
So funny.
But that thing, I try to keep my brain active. Like you've taught me, your brain is a muscle that I need to work out, which I learned from you. And so, I try to study my Italian every night. I try to really kind of do something with my brain. Unfortunately, I'm in a period of my life where I'm still not 100% me. I think that's the other thing with mommy brain, especially with young kids. I think it eventually comes back to you kind of lose yourself in your kids. And it really takes a long time for you to kind of find yourself again. And, like I said, I'm starting to, like after 2 years old, you kind of start, but I'm curious how, a new baby will start back at square one. Right. I'll be back into it, but it takes a while. And so it's like, that's kind of my hobby right now. It's like, okay, I get to do my Italian at night and focus on my brain, and, it's for me, or, working out's been tough because I'm pregnant, but, once hopefully I can get that back into that again. And, but kind of taking time for yourself, but it's hard. It's hard to do. And you kind of lose yourself, and until you can kind of get that back, I don't know if the mommy brain will improve maybe once that happens. So I'm curious, like I said, I kind of start back at square one, but hopefully over time it'll kind of maybe come back.
No, I think that those are really good take-home messages. So community, talking to other people, and then having something for yourself. I think that's awesome. And we'll have to have you back in a couple of years so you can answer those questions on if you've noticed any changes.
For the newborn stage and
beyond. The empty nest syndrome is a whole another thing. She's like, don't tell me about that.
I know, I'm not ready for that.
All right, Kristen. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to listen to it. Thanks.
right. Thank you so much, Dr. Callaghan, for joining us. We just heard from my best friend about what it's like to have mommy brain from kind of a firsthand experience, but now I'm very excited to have you on the podcast to tell us a little bit more about the neuroscience behind it and anything you would like to add in your experience. I think I just told you right offline that I've been a huge fan of your work for a very long time, so I was super excited that you accepted my invitation to come on the podcast. So first, thank you so much for doing that. But do you mind just briefly introducing yourself and just telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure. I love to talk about mommy brain. So my name is Bridget Callaghan, and I'm an assistant professor of psychology at UCLA, so the University of California, Los Angeles. I started in 2019. I've been here for a couple of years, weathered a pandemic, and come out the other end, kind of. So I've been researching, lots of different things across the course of my career. I mostly focus on early life adversity. I look at parent-child relationships, and kind of more recently in the last, say, 5 years, we've started to focus more on mothers and parenthood.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm just making mental notes of things to bring you back on to talk about, because so many exciting things. But Kristen did talk about her experiences with kind of like memory loss, forgetfulness during pregnancy and also during motherhood. So what does the research have to say about all this?
Yeah. So firstly, yes, mummy brain exists definitely from a subjective perspective. I have a child. I think you said your friend has 4, or she's pregnant with her 4th, but power to her. That's amazing. I'm just the one, and it's a lot of work. And in fact, I was writing my first paper on mummy brain when I was pregnant with him. So it was interesting to kind of see the objective, subjective kind of discrepancy in mummy brain play out in real life. So basically, in terms of the subjective experience of mummy brain, it's extremely well supported. So lots and lots of studies have shown that women who are pregnant and in the postpartum period feel this like brain fog, memory loss, cognitive changes. And I will put my hand up and say that I absolutely experienced that as well when I was pregnant, and particularly in the postpartum period. My husband and I would be like taking our son for a walk around the neighborhood, and we just like couldn't have a conversation because we just couldn't like get a conversation going. It was just like impossible to like think about things in any sort of way. So we would just like silently walk around the neighborhood. So there are definitely subjective reports that are very well validated. Where it becomes interesting is the objective evidence. So there are lots and lots of studies that have been done on mummy brain from this kind of objective cognitive test perspective. And in fact, lots of meta-analyses, so at least 2 meta-analyses have been done where they basically compile together all of those results from the many studies. And what they show in these meta-analyses is that there are very few objective memory deficits in pregnancy. There are some very small findings that tend to be consistent across studies. And so tasks that really heavily tax the prefrontal cortex and prefrontal reserves, things like verbal paired associates tasks, where you need to like learn about one word that's paired with another word, and then subsequently you're given the first part of the word stem and you just have to kind of spontaneously generate the second part. That's a really hard task, and it requires a lot of prefrontal cortex. That tends to be somewhat disrupted during pregnancy and in the postpartum. And then kind of free recall tasks. So just, remembering things from that you've been presented. That's also a very tough task. Also requires a lot of prefrontal cognitive stuff, and that is also a little bit, there's a small decrement during pregnancy and in the postpartum. So then we're left in this weird situation where we have all of these women, including some scientists, reporting this subjective change in memory that's not backed up with the objective evidence. And so now we're in a position where we're trying to figure out, like, why is that? So what is causing these subjective memory deficits? And there could be, a variety of different reasons why women are reporting this that stem from just this huge cognitive change and burden in pregnancy. So like you've got all of a sudden overnight 1 million more things to think about. There are these like priming effects because everyone, once you get pregnant, you're immediately you learn about mummy brain. You probably even already know about mummy brain before you're pregnant. You can't escape it. It's online. It's everywhere. And so, all of a sudden, when you forget your keys, you might attribute it to mummy brain, this very salient feature of your environment, rather than just the fact that everyone forgets their keys from time to time. So there are a multitude of things that could explain the deficit, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot of data on it at the moment.
That's so fascinating. I think people will be surprised and even shocked by what you're saying. But that's the purpose of objective research, is that we can actually test that. So it's interesting that there's that huge discrepancy. And I know your work and others are looking into exactly why that happens. I do want to ask, because a lot of my friend Kristen was saying that her husband has even noticed some differences. But do you think it's possibly that kind of priming effect as well?
So it's many things. So it's firstly, sleep is disrupted during pregnancy, and particularly in the postpartum, and that's for both parents. So when our sleep goes out the window, then so does our cognition. So we're not very good thinkers when we haven't slept well. So that's for both parents. The cognitive load of parenting, I think personally, is higher for mothers, but it is shared by both parents, when you have a two-parent relationship or, two parents for the child. And then you've got this hormonal change for the woman that's kind of spontaneously produced by the state of being pregnant, but you also have hormonal changes in fathers who are engaging in caregiving actions, like learning about caregiving, learning about the infant. And so those changes definitely, those behaviors in the fathers definitely cause changes in biology and also in the brain. And these could also contribute to the daddy brain. So although it's spoken about less, it's definitely something that occurs in dads.
Awesome. I do want to get back to daddy brain, so let's put a pin in that. But I think it's just so fascinating that there's all these changes. And you're right, maybe the sleep disruption is actually what people are reporting that has more objective cognitive changes. Because I was talking to my friend and colleague Eric, and that's what he said. I don't sleep, so that's probably why I'm kind of sluggish, but that makes total sense. Yeah. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your kind of rebranding of Mommy Brain, which I think is so wonderful, because you kind of alluded to this, that, you have to change your brain to focus on a new human and all of their needs and parenting and all of these new situations. And that certainly requires changes in your brain. So I'd love to hear more about your rebranding idea.
Yeah. So, the rebranding kind of has two components to it. So one component is just trying to figure out, this objective-subjective deficit that we've already spoken about. So why is it that so many women are reporting this cognitive change, yet we still don't know a lot about it? And what is kind of underlying that? But then there's this second component to the rebranding, which is really more about, trying to acknowledge the fact that parenting is difficult, extremely difficult, and getting more and more so in modern day. So parenting is really difficult, and there are lots of cognitive benefits to pregnancy that are known in animal models and are known in some human studies as well, but are just not studied or not spoken about as much. So for example, we know from the rodent literature and also monkey literature that when animals become pregnant, and during the postpartum period, increases in the efficacy of predation. So they become much better predators. They become much better at caching food. So their spatial memory really drastically improves. They become, better able to provide for the needs of their infants. They become better nest builders, all sorts of cognitive benefits that make sense, evolutionarily speaking. Hopefully, we would, when becoming parents, create the necessary neuronal architecture and behaviors that would support this, new task that we have, this new incredibly important task to care for and help our young survive. So the animal literature kind of takes that adaptation and kind of enhancements focus, but the human literature kind of feels a little bit like it's stuck in this mummy brain, women are stupid during pregnancy, why is that phase, which I find personally very annoying, and it bothers me a lot to see that narrative kind of playing out again and again. So we're trying to rebrand this as, a stage of cognitive plasticity, And it's, not just us. There are many researchers in this area that are doing the same thing. This term matrescence, so representing this transition to caregiving or motherhood or parenting, as similar in magnitude to the kind of body and brain change that happens during adolescence. So we've thought about adolescence for a long time as being a sensitive period. Now let's try and bring that into, parenting and motherhood.
I love that message. And yeah, it directly translates from kind of the preclinical or the animal research, which is where us as neuroscientists, we get a lot of our important ideas, and it's a lot easier to understand what's happening kind of under the hood in those groups. So I'm really glad you're doing that. I think it's so needed.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So you alluded to some of the things that change during pregnancy, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about like brain and body changes that we do know of.
Yeah. So there are a few areas where the brain and where we know about brain and body changes during pregnancy. So firstly, we know that everything changes an awful lot. So there are huge hormonal changes. The body grows and, shifts and changes dramatically. Like hips are opening and it takes, over a year for the hips to return to their normal placement. So there are all of these physiological, behavioral, hormonal changes during pregnancy. As far as the brain goes, we don't know a huge amount. Part of that is because it's challenging to scan pregnant women. Although there's not any evidence that MRI scans are damaging to fetuses, it's still difficult to get women into the scanner. Some scanners have rules about it, so whatever. And is it?
Yeah. Will their bellies even fit in the bore of the magnet? Because it's like, for those who don't know, it's like a long tube, and sometimes I feel like it's a little bit cramped in there.
Very cramped. So yes, they do, but it is definitely a cramped kind of situation.
Sure.
But nonetheless, there are these kind of like technical issues with scanning pregnant women. So that's one component to it. But the other component is that, it just hasn't been studied in the depth that it deserves, given that it's this tremendous, amazing period of adult life where we see this heightened plasticity and in the service of, providing support for a young child. So it's not given the attention that it deserves. So what we know so far are kind of structural changes and functional changes. So in terms of the structural side, there was a really great study that came out in 2017 by Hoeksema and colleagues. And they were looking at grey matter changes in the brain. And the really neat thing about this study was that they had women pre-pregnancy and then after pregnancy. So they didn't do any pregnancy scanning. But the fact that they had a pre-pregnancy group is pretty amazing. It's really, really hard to recruit people who are maybe going to become pregnant in the next couple of years. So they had this really nice contrast, and what they saw was actually grey matter decreases in multiple areas of the brain, including the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. And those grey matter changes did seem to be associated with behaviour. So specifically, the larger the changes, the more, or rather the better attachment, the better social cognition and caregiving that these parents were providing. So it seemed like these were adaptive brain changes. There were some like media outlets that kind of caught onto this and were like, oh, the brain is shrinking during pregnancy. Which is, not true. And as scientists, we know that often grey matter decreases are associated with specialization in behaviour.
Right. If your brain doesn't change, that's possibly not a good thing.
Right. Exactly. The brain is meant to change. This is a very, very good thing. So that's one side of thing, these structural changes. And a few different studies have also looked at grey matter changes in the brain, particularly in the postpartum period, and actually shown increases, 4 to 6 weeks postpartum and onwards. Another kind of structural metric is like brain age. And, it's too complicated to describe. I don't even think I fully understand how they, create this metric of brain age, but it's based on mostly structural parameters. And really amazingly with that literature, it's been shown that mothers show sustained, so even up to 6 years post-birth, lower brain age than non-mothers. And this actually tracks with parity. So the more children you have up to a point, the lower your brain age. So your friend's brain at this point in time would look probably
super young. She'll be very excited to hear about this.
So those are some really cool findings. And then in terms of the functional side of things, that's where we tend to see the adaptation focus in the human research. So the functional studies have looked at things like response to your own baby's cry, response to pictures of your baby, and shown neural changes or neural functional changes that are associated with greater responsivity to your own infant, which makes a lot of sense as well. And that also tracks with attachment and, subsequent caregiving.
Mm-hmm. No, that was awesome. That was a fully comprehensive overview of what I'm sure is a very big literature, but like you said, needs to grow even more. Mm-hmm. So that was so helpful. I want to go back to the daddy brain mm-hmm. thing because I think that's so interesting. And Kristen had alluded to the fact that she thinks her husband is kind of complementary and kind of fills in where she thinks she has her own subjective gaps. Mm-hmm. But what do you think about daddy brain?
Yeah, so again, not that much research on daddy brain on non-birthing parents. So you can think of adoptive parents or foster parents, step parents. What we know is that caregiving is learned behavior. And so pregnant people have the added benefit of these hormonal changes that accompany the state of pregnancy and postpartum. And this really helps facilitate these the learning of these caregiving behaviors. But anyone can learn to be a caregiver, including dads. And, when we learn things, it changes our brain, it changes our biology. So there is such a thing as daddy brain in terms of brain changes in fathers postpartum. And this tracks with the amount of caregiving that they provide to the young. So the more involved fathers are with caregiving, then the more the brain changes, which is, really not surprising. I think it's interesting to think about, whether it's a hetero relationship or otherwise, to think about this dual parenting role and when that can be working together. Like your friend said, her husband is maybe complementary and picking up some of the slack that she thinks she has let down and probably vice versa. And I think that's probably true in a lot of relationships, but, the parenting relationship changes a lot, or rather the romantic relationship changes a lot when you become parents, not surprisingly. And that can be yet another source of cognitive burden and, conflict in the relationship that one needs to deal with postpartum. So there can also be like a daddy brain that's related to stress, lack of sleep, and other relationship issues.
Yeah, for sure. It affects, I'm sure, all aspects of life, definitely. How has this research affected, if it has, your own parenting? And you mentioned you have a son. So how old is your son? And then how has it affected how you maybe parent him?
Yeah. So Freddie is 2 now. He just turned 2 a couple of months ago. He's a darling, little Freddie. We realized the other day that we hadn't taught him his middle name or last name, so now he can say all of his names together, which is just really cute. He's always saying it all the time and telling other people, which is adorable. I had him 2 years ago, and as I said right at the start of our discussion, I was writing my first paper on mummy brain whilst I was pregnant with him, so it was really quite interesting to see that play out in real life, because I was in my paper showing actually cognitive benefits to pregnancy and in the postpartum period. Yet in my own life, I had one day I swallowed the dog's medication instead of my own medication. And
oh, no.
Just all sorts of weird things are happening.
Oh, my goodness. You're like, come on, this has to be real.
Like having to call the hospital being like, is this the medication all right, or am I going to need to induce vomiting at this point?
Oh, my goodness.
So, very funny contrast happening. So I think the way that it's changed my parenting, and I think this is probably a product of the research as well as just being humbled by the experience of becoming a parent, is just to be nicer to myself and to, everyone. Everyone gets a lot of grace in my life because, parenting is really, really tough. And there are all sorts of things that happen. It's literally, the hugest, in my opinion, the hugest life change that one can go through. It changes every aspect of your being, and it really requires you to be rebuilt again afterwards. So, things like a slight inability to hold a great conversation in the few weeks postpartum, I don't really think that's a big deal compared to all of the other things that your brain and body is doing at that time. So it's not really that women become stupid during pregnant. Women are never stupid, in my opinion. It's that our focus is changed to a very different and much more important task at that point in time, which is keeping this baby alive, keeping me alive, getting some sleep. You know, it's survival mode. And so, yeah, you're not going to come up with your best philosophic thoughts and conversations at that period of time, and that's all right. There are also other stages of life when that's not likely to happen, like getting off a flight, super jet lagged. You're not going to write a paper at that point in time. You're not going to apply for a job then. So I think it's just shifting the expectations around parenting and what is expected of mothers at this point in time, giving ourselves grace and trying to emphasize the cognitive benefits that happen during pregnancy, and then contextualizing the perceived deficits that we have during pregnancy.
Yeah, I think that's a really great message too. And I hope this reaches a lot of people because, like you said, it gets a bad rap. I think a lot of people think there's something wrong with them, and it gives those folks a little bit more, like you said, context. Like this is maybe just temporary, lack of sleep, but there are so many benefits and positives, and your body is amazing that it's doing all of these things. I don't think that gets enough credit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all focused on, getting the old body back rather than appreciating what the new body has done.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. The amazing feat that just happened. Yeah. So that's a great message. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your research and what you are up to in this area.
Yeah. So, the research that I've done in the past is more about these cognitive changes during pregnancy. So one of the things we noticed when we were reviewing literature, so this is research that I started as a postdoc with Nim Tottenham at Columbia University and Catherine Monk at Columbia Medical. And we were really thinking about, what is missing in this literature of cognitive changes during pregnancy. And one thing we noticed is that none of the tasks really tap into, they're not ecologically relevant. So in other words, there are these standardized tasks that everyone gets, but they don't assess anything that's like specific to pregnancy. So if we think that there are these cognitive benefits to pregnancy, they're probably likely to be found specifically for stimuli that relate to the way that attention is shifting. So if we're reorienting towards infant stimuli or baby stimuli, then maybe this is the type of stimuli we should be using in these cognitive tests to pick up a cognitive advantage if there is one. So we designed this new task to look at these cognitive benefits during pregnancy, specifically looking at baby relevant items versus kind of everyday adult items. And so, together with Claire McCormick, who's at NYU, we found that pregnant mothers, so in the third trimester, mothers learned better than never pregnant mothers on these tasks, so specifically the baby-related items. So there was this cognitive advantage specific to the baby-related items for learning. But then surprisingly, when we tested everyone's memory 2 weeks later, the mothers were better than the never pregnant women on all types of items, so both the pregnancy-specific items as well as the adult items. So this suggests that there's both like a learning advantage that's domain-specific in pregnancy, as well as this general memory advantage, which is, never been reported before. So that was kind of where we began this work. And then since then, and since, writing theoretically in this realm and thinking about the history of mummy brain and, what the benefits of pregnancy are and reflecting on my own experiences of being pregnant, we're starting to do more work now in my lab here at UCLA on, thinking about pregnancy as this sensitive period for change. And so, as I mentioned at the start of our conversation, I focus a lot on early life adversity. And so I've been thinking a lot about how early life adversity influences our transition into parenthood. And then how early life adversity, how pregnancy rather can be a period of enhanced plasticity where we might be able to address some of the long-standing issues of early life adversity. So one of the things that me and one of my students are doing at the moment is looking at how the brain kind of models information that's coming from the body during pregnancy and how this might moderate the risk for depression at that time of life. So we actually see, pretty excitingly, that mothers are better at this internal body modeling than non-pregnant people. So that's pretty cool. So there are these kind of generalized cognitive enhancements again during pregnancy, and that does seem to moderate depression risk. So that's an exciting area, and we hope to go more into that realm of just like brain-body understanding during pregnancy and how early life adversity kind of plays into that.
That's awesome. I have so many questions for you, but let me try to streamline. So the first study that you mentioned is really, really interesting because I think a lot of people don't think of kind of the ecologically valid aspect of research, because in many cases you just bring people into the lab and you kind of put them into this artificial laboratory environment and state, and that doesn't really mimic what people experience in the real world. My students and I talk about that all the time. And then the fact that we didn't really have the tools to study these positive aspects, but your lab was able to develop them, and you actually saw that there are changes with these new tools. So that's a really, really cool story, and I hope to see more of that. And then with what you just mentioned, I think that there's hopefully... I just totally lost my train of thought, and I'm not even pregnant. See, it happens. It's
See, if you were pregnant, you'd be like, oh, mommy brain.
Yeah. Oh, no, I remember now. Okay. So the idea of like the sensitive period, could you talk a little bit more about that? Because you and I both have worked in kind of childhood and adolescence, and you've talked about that previously as like, your brain is always changing. Like you said, it's a muscle. It changes throughout the life, but there are possibly times in your life where it's more receptive to change. So the fact that you're looking at pregnancy as a way to kind of change the brain for the better and to make people possibly address things like mental disorders is so fascinating. So maybe talk a little bit more about the sensitive period idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think of it very similarly to the story of adolescence, but it's just like a little bit further behind in its history, the pregnancy side of it. So the adolescence story is really that for the longest time, people thought about adolescence as this period of storm and stress, this really risky period. And everyone was like, oh, goodness, we've just got to get the adolescents through this period and make sure that they're safe because they're making really risky, terrible decisions and they're really at risk for mental health problems. And that is true to some extent. So we do see increases in risk-taking behavior during adolescence, and adolescents are at heightened risk for mental health problems. But there's always a flip side to the risk, and that is opportunity. So firstly, adolescents take all different sort of risks, including negative ones, like maybe risky driving or maybe risky sex or drug taking. But they also take lots of positive risks, like, taking a new class or going out to a party where you don't know that many people and meeting new friends, or, activism is, really enhanced during adolescence. So there's this opportunity that we're becoming aware of as a scientific community that's kind of embedded within this period of development. So there's both a risk and an opportunity to adolescence. And I think that's true of all sensitive periods. So always when the brain is particularly receptive to environmental input, we have this risk that comes along with that, because what if the input is bad, or what if the brain doesn't, respond in the way that we would want it to, or, whatever. But there is also this opportunity, which means that the brain is responsive to positive inputs. And if those inputs are available, then this might be a chance for the brain to go on a particularly good trajectory towards, good mental health outcomes. So I think of pregnancy in the same way. So this is a time of adult life, and potentially the only time of adult life where we see hugely heightened plasticity in the brain. So the brain is changing a lot. The body is changing a lot. Hormone profiles are changing a huge amount. And so all of this change, all of this flux is providing an opportunity for the brain to rewire. And, that could potentially be for the better. Certainly we know that, as we've already spoken about, there are many cognitive advantages to pregnancy that are under-recognized, and to parenting, and things like, like executive functioning type of thing. So being able to do, multitask, that sort of thing is definitely increased in parents. Parents are great multitaskers. But there are also kind of more, fundamental psychological things that are changed during pregnancy and in the postpartum. So it's a very existential type of life change. There's a lot of reflection that people do during this stage of life, bringing up, memories and thoughts about how you were parented, how you want to change things for the better. So there's also this, reactivation of all of this, really heavy psychological information at this point in time. And, this, along with the plasticity, really gives us a chance to kind of intervene and think about the ways that we could reframe things. And, people are motivated to make change at this time as well.
Oh, that's amazing. And yeah, there's so many changes that happen. It's a period of opportunity, I think, is a good way of kind of reframing that. Awesome. So I wanted to end with what resources you would have for expectant mothers, people who may think they have mommy brain. We didn't touch much on postpartum depression, but I'm sure that's a big area of research for you. So what would you recommend for people?
Yeah, I think there are some good books that are coming out. So there are several authors. I can think of 3, and I can provide you with the details of these books afterwards, that are like popular press books on mummy brain, but that really take this kind of balanced approach between what are the changes for the better and for the worse when that's relevant. So I can definitely provide you with those. I think, one of the biggest resources or advice that I could impart to pregnant people and to parenting people is that, mental health problems are huge during this period of time. And whether they're like diagnosable mental health problems like major depressive disorder or anxiety disorder, or whether they're, existential issues that are cropping up about, what's your place in the world and what sort of parent do you want to be and whatnot. It is really helpful to talk to people. And there are lots of therapists that really specialize in this life transition. It's a huge, huge life transition. And so to think that you will breeze through it with no issues at all, I think is just not reasonable. Everyone's going to struggle with it at some point in time, in some way. So, understanding that your brain is perfectly adapted to this period of life through years and years and years of evolution. So you're ready for this neurally. And that doesn't take away from the fact that it's going to be really tough as well. So understanding that we're not damaged, we're not trying to deal with some kind of ruined brain or body. But at the same time, this is a really tough period of life, and it's going to involve some struggle. So to get the help that you need when you need it.
Oh, that's wonderful. We will absolutely gather those recommendations from you and put them in the link to the podcast's bio. And then I'm glad you brought up mental health. That's something that we talk about all the time on this podcast. And Psychology Today has a great website. And I love that you brought up that there's therapists who specialize in that type of life transition or parenting or postpartum issues. So thank you so much for bringing that up. That's a really great point. I want to give you the last word. How can people find more out about you and your work?
Yeah. So my lab is called the Brain and Body Lab, or the BAB Lab at UCLA. And you can, I'll give you my lab website, and you can go there and, take a look around if you're interested. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm Dr. B. Callaghan. And, I try to really do public outreach regularly. So, I always post, podcasts that I've done or articles that I've written on the lab website. So that's another way to keep up to date with what we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. This was a real pleasure to talk to you.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you, Hilary.
That wraps up another episode of the BrainSTEM podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and share this with friends and family, and be sure to follow us on social media at BrainSTEM Podcast.